one, one, one.
Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for coming. Especially, I don't know if it's still raining outside, but if it is, thank you for coming on a rainy day. Welcome to people. Can, yeah, can people hear me? Or it's a bit weird hearing myself this loud. Okay. Um, yeah, so I'm really glad to be here. Welcome to people online and in person. Um, I'm really glad to be in Brixton having this conversation about the ends. Bit of housekeeping before we start. So there are toilets. If you came in through that door that way, it's back up the stairs and then round. And we have fire exits also that way, and accessible fire exits. See a member of the team, and it's that way. And yeah, and we've got online, we've got Stephanie supporting the chat. So big up, thank you to Stephanie. So a quick little introduction to Healing Justice London before we get started. So Healing Justice London builds community-led health and healing to create capacity for personal and structural transformation. We work on a community, structural and movement level to repair and build the conditions for health and healing that dignify and support all of us to be well. Using a multi-layered and multi-systems approach and cultural strategy, we work to disarm the cycles of harm, ill health, and chronic unsustainability that oppression reproduces in our communities and social justice movements. We nurture cultures towards futures free from intimate, interpersonal, and structural violence. So, before we kick off, just one thing as well. I want to invite everyone to be in the space, however you want to be. We want to be, be consensual with yourself, because consent is one of the key things that Healing Justice London also works as a key concept. So in that invitation, if you want to engage in a practice to get a bit more comfortable in the space, and maybe just arrive and help us to arrive in this space, I'll invite you to do that with us now. But it's very optional. If you don't feel like doing it, you don't have to. So, yeah, I'll invite you to just get comfortable in your seat. Just kind of like try to settle. And then try to feel your root into the ground. So, yeah, if that's your feet or the back of your legs on the chair. And your sensations happen in the present moment. So just an invitation to get a sense of how's your body feeling right now. Again, all invitational. If that doesn't feel comfortable to you, then just stop. And then just an invitation also to just get a sense of your breath, if that works for you. How's your breath feeling in this moment? And could you extend your exhale a little longer? And if that helps in any way, if you feel signs of settling, maybe your jaw unclenches a little bit, maybe you can feel your chest a bit more. Just try to take note of those signs of settling and what that does for you. Okay, cool. Thank you. Let's return to the space. Maybe stretch a little bit. How are we feeling? How are we feeling? Okay. Thank you. So, before I introduce our speakers today, by the way, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Alex. I work with Healing Justice as Community Comms Lead. So just a little introduction to this session. So this session is Rehumanizing the Ends. And Healing Justice, our work, it is preoccupied with, like I mentioned, healing and also love and connection and affirming each other's lives. So a struggle against things that are anti-life. Also, so much in this work reminds us to practice the kind of politics that we want to see. So bell hooks reminds us, in a world of disconnection and individualism, to repattern our behavior and our relationships for intimacy. And obviously, we can't have this love and affirmation if our relationships aren't ones of depth. It's harder to show up in solidarity. It's harder to see the love from people in and amongst the messier and uglier sides of us. So we need to do decolonial work to not perpetuate the structures and to better see each other. So when talking about the ends, I define the ends. I'll invite our panel also to kind of like share what they think about the ends, and in particular, Joy, like I think your work is really incredible in sort of like speaking about all of the different realms of what makes up our communities. But yeah, I will say working class, racialized inner city communities. And with our communities, I think it's often difficult to have a depth of relationship. Geographically, like estates are often closed off, and our areas are portrayed as unsafe, and there are lots of damaging narratives about us. So, just one note as well. So we're here to talk about rehumanization, but also dehumanization. The practice of comparing people to animals, or talking about people as if they have no agency, or portraying people as brutal or numb, or not having the full range of human sensitivity. I also want to just like, I think it would be difficult to have this conversation without mentioning that there's active dehumanization of Palestinian people going on at the moment by Israel's government, by our politicians, by the media. And yeah, like I think as well as organizing protest, solidarity for Palestine, I think what this talk offers us is the opportunity to speak about humanity and love and the preciousness of our lives, and why we recognize and grieve for Palestinians, for Sudanese people, for Congolese people, and why we back it for their liberation. and our communities know colonialism. We know the fight. We know the survival that we need to have against these forms of inhumanity. Dehumanizing narratives are there to divide and to mandate violence. And through this, we cling to our humanity and our hearts and our love. So I hope for this conversation, we can talk a bit about who we are and our pain and our struggles, as well as our joy and our love and our creativity. Because the kids in the hood experience so much neglect, so much violence, so much deprivation, victimization, and they deserve our best efforts. Cool. All right, enough talking from me. I'm really excited to have these speakers here because, like, yeah, just they are incredible in so many different ways. So Andre, just to start with Andre. So Andre's a genius. Andre is from St. Raph's in Brent. We are like basically from the same ends. Like I live around the corner from there, and I always used to play out in Raph's when I was younger. But yeah, so Andre is the founder and headmaster of Freedom and Balance, an art college based in London. Freedom and Balance designs curricula to help people exercise their creative identity. Andre believes art college is for everyone, and when done well, can help people to ask the right questions in new ways in a world that is ever-changing and in need of solutions. Next, we have Yusuf Bakali. So, yeah, what can I say about Yusuf? Just formative in my thinking, I think. Like, really, like, yeah, I've told you this, Yusuf, like, you've given me a lot just in terms of, like, the way I think about things. But yeah, like, I really find your work so valuable for kind of, like, sharing, like, why, you know, like, sharing, like, we actually have such a sensationalist idea of youth on road, and how can we just bring it back to, like, what are these, like, kids' lives really like, and what does it feel like as well? And your concept, Mum Pain, which is shorthand for pain of the mundane, is really instructive in telling us about that. So just a bit more about Yusuf. So Dr. Yusuf Bakali grew up in Brixton, South London, and from an early age became aware of injustice and inequality operating in society. His key research focuses around the lives of young people involved in road life, a contemporary street culture of which elements have recently been the subject of popular media representations in shows like Top Boy and films like Blue Story. Yusuf's areas of expertise are youth, social exclusion, race, crime, music, youth cultures, road life, austerity, decoloniality, and masculinities. He holds a PhD in sociology and a master's in social research methods, and a BA in politics and society. And next, it's Dr. Joy White, and I feel really, really privileged to say that, like, and to be sitting on the same stage as Dr. Joy White, like, yeah. So what I would say about Joy is that you, like, Joy, I feel like you're such a wonderful representative for our communities. Like, if I could pick one person and go and rep the ends, like, I would pick Joy. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, like, your work just, I feel like, speaks about our communities in such a depth and sensitivity and nuance. And your book, Terraformed, Joy's book, Terraformed, Young Black Lives in the Inner City, is an incredible study of a square mile in Forest Gate, using ethnography, interviews, memoirs, and archive to look at the impact of racism, austerity, and gentrification on young black lives in the inner city. And how young black people are being affected by being poor in an affluent world. Also, something else to say about Joy is that I feel like you really, like, engage in academic work from the heart, and I really appreciate that. A little bit more about Joy. So Joy is a senior lecturer in applied social sciences at the University of Bedfordshire, and the author of Terraformed, Young Black Lives in the Inner City. Joy has presented her work at a number of UK and international institutions, including the post-Windrush generation, Black British Voices of Resistance, the University of Cambridge, the Subcultures Network Conference Panel, the University of Reading, the Place of Music, Loughborough University, the Annual Black Studies Lecture, University of Nottingham, the Stanford University Forum for African Studies, Urban Culture and Political Engagement, Tropen Museum, Amsterdam, Third International Research Conference on Cultural and Creative Industries. That's a lot of places, wow. Stephen Lawrence Research Center. Yusuf told me to say that, yeah. And yeah. As you can see, like, Dr. Joe White has an extensive bio and has done incredible amounts of great work over the years. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'm going to invite our speakers to open and talk a little bit about your work and your journey into it. And if you could also like briefly touch on how your work connects to the topic for today. And we didn't discuss who's going to go first, so whoever feels like it, you can go.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, man. That was big. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. I hate holding microphones. It feels really unnatural to me. Yeah, why? I sometimes think why Alex invited me and what is about my work, you know, in the context of this kind of panacea, this umbrella. And probably the main thing is, well, the first one was the idea of the mum paying. That's how I met Alex, actually. He just hit me up one day about the mum paying and asked me to do a podcast for him. And that idea kind of came out of my PhD studies, which is about life on road, and what I was kind of picking up from the young people I was talking to. Well, like, firstly, when I'm talking to young people on road, I don't care about what crimes you've committed, or those kind of narratives weren't of interest to me. And you kind of touched on it. Obviously, coming from the neighborhood, I grew up about 400 meters over there. So, like, obviously, you know the richness of life here because you've lived the part of that life. And you kind of, when you kind of get out, and I was writing my essays at undergraduate and all these things at university, I was like, none of that is really represented. Like, we're kind of represented as muggers, as, you know, statistics in school exclusion, statistics in, you know, various kind of usually, like, existential, I mean, like, normally to do with us dying or being put in prison, like, that tended to be what I was looking at. And I don't think I was consciously trying to resist that framing, really. I think I was more just trying to say what I knew and what I kind of was experiencing. And so the idea of the mum paying is like a psychosocial idea. And it was what these young people, some of them had been involved in serious youth violence and some of them hadn't. What they were sort of expressing to me was this kind of malaise or distress. And I think commonly we deal with that using kind of mental health narratives, and we're using kind of individual deficit. So I don't really have a problem with psychology, and I think it's really important, and I'm an advocate for mental health and all of these things. But I do think mental health doesn't start in here. It starts outside in our environment. And that combination between where you meet your environment and how you're treated in your environment and what you're experiencing in your environment ultimately is going to dictate large parts of your well-being. It's very, very, very hard to find your well-being in a situation where you're kind of consistently accosted or oppressed. And that's kind of where the idea started to come from. And it also started to develop in the spaces in between. So you hear about our community when we make the news. You hear about the community when some terrible shootings happened or some terrible incident or event has happened, which has kind of breached the threshold of respectability, the threshold of like this kind of understanding of peace. I was reading Edouard Glissant the other day, and he talked about this Western imaginary of Western people being peaceful. And in the context of the violence that's happened globally, that's a really interesting thing. So we're always cast as the people, the breachers of the peace. You understand? And I sort of became less interested in those things. And I started to think about, so what's happening in between these moments where we, inverted commas, breach the peace in whatever way? And basically just people feeling like devalued and not feeling like enough and coming from a position of like deficit. And it's not a sense that that deficit is innate in them, is that that's how they've been positioned. That they've been positioned in a way by the school system, by the social care system, by like a variety of other circumstances and situations in their lives, that they've sort of become, or like come to know themselves as valueless. And a lot of what I felt like these young people on road were doing was performing or trying to compensate for this innate sense of feeling not valued. And someone was telling me the other day about a kind of another psychosocial term called mattering, and how mattering is really important to people, which is kind of, you know, self-descriptive. I think Ez is here today. She was with me when we were talking about that. So that's kind of where it came from. And then once you kind of put on these goggles, these kind of sociology goggles, like you can't take them off. So I'm walking around Brixton, and the early kind of iterations of this idea is Brixton's a good case study because you've got all this gentrification that's happened here. You've got a lot of people that come to the space and really enjoy the space. You understand, in a different way to how maybe some people that have lived here intergenerationally over a period of time have come to know and experience the space. And it felt like some people, the only resistance they were meeting was the resistance from the air and the friction on the ground. And those are the two things also that they need to keep them stood up. But then other people are sort of having to traverse through like treacle or concrete or like wet concrete. You understand? Like something is like you still have agency, you can still make choices, you're still trying to kind of go about your business and meet your desired ends, but you're having to do that in the context of traveling through a much more difficult viscosity or consistency in your environment. And that was how I was starting to understand this idea that I'm pain, is that this distress doesn't come from something that's wrong in here, it comes from a real troubling, like something that's really difficult, but it's so intimate that it's hard to put a name to it. So like when you're walking to the shop, you know, something small happening, interpersonal violence in your community, being excluded from school or feeling like you're not being treated fairly in those environments. All of these things, or just not being seen, like them not recognizing what's happening to you in your life and being able to advocate and protect you and counsel you around those things. And that's where that idea came from. And I think when I talk about rehumanizing the ends, I think we've got to talk about it in the everyday. We have to talk about it in those spaces in between when we cross the threshold and we become seen. You know what I mean? Has to happen in those spaces in between. And that's what the mum pain was. It was partially a language to kind of identify structural violence, but it was also a language to talk about mental health in a different way. So it's a language to talk about mental health from the outside in, as opposed to inside out. So what's wrong with you? How do we treat you as an individual? Generally, like if you look at the statistics about who suffers more or who is sectioned more, these are generally groups that historically have suffered from inequality and oppression. Like, these aren't mysteries. And like, if we're really honest, I'm gonna say something controversial, like the positioning of psychology as a discipline, its status as a science particularly, are all aspects that also are to do with social control. They're to do with how do we treat social problems without affecting the status quo. And psychologists do amazing work. I'm not getting onto psychologists, I'm not getting onto the discipline of psychology, but as a sociologist, I'm asking a question about where do we want that to fit in our kind of understanding of society, and also fundamentally us and our own well-being and how we understand that. And those are the questions I was asking when I came out of that idea. And I think that they relate to this question that Alex is asking about how do we reassert our humanity? And part of that is also finding a language for our suffering, I think, which is what I tried to do in using some different language, really. Is that cool? Should we move on?
Amazing. Yeah, can we get some? Thank you, yeah. Who's next?
Hi everyone, my name's Andre. I live in an estate called St. Rafford's Estate, which is based in northwest London. I've been there all my life. and it's a neighborhood, and it's cool. I didn't necessarily know that there was a ton of stories that was surrounding the area and surrounding my friends, only until I started to go to college and I said I'm from St. Raph's, and then automatically their face drops and then they start to reel off these stories that are associated with my ends. I lived with that stigma for a very, very, very long time until I realized that I actually have a opportunity to influence how much that stigma is said. So I love drawing and art and poetry and all that kind of stuff. But by the time I get to like 18, 19, 20, I started to get into self-publishing and telling my own stories. The only metric that I had was to be as honest as possible with just my imagination, not even just my life experiences. These are the things that I think is a really cool story to say. I didn't know that me just being genuine to my tastes actually was original, because there's not a lot of people who think like that or have the same type of imagination. So then I started to create these like different projects, different books. And then eventually my world started to open up around me. And when I say the world started to open up around me, it's like I'm someone from Northwest London at the time. There's no creative community there. There's no like creative jobs that you can get. There's nothing like that. But then I was able to get those opportunities, and someone said to me once, the only reason why you're here in this room is because of this, which is like an old book that I wrote. Is like every single time that you create, you open up doors for people and places and opportunities that you just wouldn't have had access to if you didn't speak. So the term freedom and balance, which is now the name of my art college, came from that conversation, which is the more you create, the freer you become. So being able to like see the world from a different lens just because I chose to write, and then going back to my estate, I started to realize that the difference between myself and the rest of my friends is that we haven't necessarily given ourselves the channels in order to create. I've kind of took away the onus on someone giving me a voice or giving me an opportunity. Like, I don't like waiting for people like that. And also as well, they're not going to pick me to talk. So it's best for me to actually just set up the thing for myself and understand how books are written, how do you set up a radio station, like all this information is available. So I reached out to 5 of my friends, and I basically said, we're going to make a passport, and that was code for we're going to create a book and it's going to open up doors for us. And I gave them one word. It was a one-word brief, and the brief was change. So that can mean any sort of change. And then I said, cool, we have a couple of months. And then over a span of time, because they're my neighbors, I can knock on their door and see if they've actually finished their work. But like over a couple of months, we then like accumulate these conversations into these chapters, which then ended up being a book called Authors of the Estate. We then had some funding to mass produce it and then give it to all 1,000 homes in St. Alpha's estate. So everyone in my estate has a copy of this book. That was in 2015, and then in 2019, someone who bought the book, which I didn't know who this person was at the time, Nabil Al-Kanani, he lives in a estate up the road from me called Chalk Hill Estate. And he basically wanted to have a conversation with me about authors, and he was like, how come you lot haven't continued it? And for me, I was like, I done what I wanted to do, I finished it, it was all over. But he was like, no, like, this is something that should continue. By that time, I'm a little bit more, what I think can happen with creative production in the ends has become a lot more expansive than when I first done it. I just wanted to tell a story, basically. But then now I was at a point where I understood how creative infrastructure or infrastructure surrounding creative businesses worked. So then it then went from how do we tell our own stories to how do you turn a council house into a publishing house. So that was the question that we based the whole second Authors of the Estate from. And we gathered a whole bunch of, we gathered 22 authors in general. And it wasn't as simple as people sitting down and writing a book. It was, some of it is people went out and wrote their own paragraphs. Some of it was like voice notes, and we transcribed the voice notes. Some of it was just conversation that ended up being transcribed as well. But we said, as long as it's in print, you're an author. And once that was produced, we then gave everyone like their own codes to sell their own books and make money from it. They didn't really use it, but whatever. We gave them the technology in it. But like we kind of set up the technology for that statement to be true, which is like, we are a publishing house. If you reduce like what a publishing house is to its core, it actually happened here in Chalk Hill. So that is very brushing through the whole thing, but that's basically the essence of what all of my work is. I run an art college called Freedom and Balance, and I was always okay, so basically when I was in St. Raf's, I always used to, there was a period of time when I thought that Shoreditch was the place where like creative geniuses lived, yeah. I know, but like at the time I really believed it, yeah. But these times I didn't have any access to that. So I just thought that, oh, I'm not good enough, so I need to wait till I get good enough to work there. And then once I started to do my own stuff, like brushed it off and do my own stuff, world opens to me. I go into these meetings with like these people who are like heads of big brands, and like, oh, you're Andre, you do authors of the estate. It's like, oh, we use your stuff for our mood boards. I was like, oh, right, like, because I was on the outside looking in, but I realized that you're out. Anyway, whatever. So I've realized that like I always come from a position of like, I try to do everything up front. I try to do the work up front. I don't really wait for anyone to tell my story for me. But going back to Rehumanising the Ends, the reason why we've done Authors of the Estate in the first place is because the origin of the word author is actually the Latin word, I think it's octa, and it's where you get the word authority from. So it's someone who writes the laws of the land. So like, we are the ones who writes the laws of our lives. We write our own stories. And the rehumanizing is like, there are so much stories about like, the moment we do something wrong, there will be a story written about us. But actually, when you get those very same people whose stories are written about to write their own story, you see it from a perspective that you will not get anywhere else. So that's one side of rehumanizing the ends, which is like, it's important to rehumanize ourselves to ourselves. The book wasn't really for the external world, it was just for us to read our own stories, but okay, like, we're not crazy kind of thing. But then the second part of rehumanizing ends, which I wouldn't have time to say it right now, but if it pops up, is there's also the rehumanizing, not just in the end product, but also in the process. Because it's very easy to be like, oh, we're going to go into our communities and rally the people up. And that's not how it works, Donnie. Like, people are not on that, like, it's not as straightforward as that. It really is you have to be very lateral in how you bring people together to write a book or get people together to do anything. And with that could come a lot of heartbreak. And if you do it consistently, you could end up being like a disillusioned. Some people's like, I'm done with it. I'm not working with these men no more. I'm not going to do this. Why do I try? Why do I bother? And there's this balance between romance and love, where it's like you need enough romance for you to start, but after a while, sometimes the romance ain't there, and you just need to love them, innit? Like, so yeah, I think it's important to understand that the humanizing of it isn't just about like seeing us as human, but it's also like when you're producing it yourself, have to be like, we're all human in it, and understanding and accepting that. So yeah, Authors of the Estate is one of the best ways to describe what my relationship with my ends is like.
I'm not quite sure how I'm supposed to follow all of that, Yusuf and Andre, because hearing you talk about your work and what you've done and what you hope to do, so while you were talking, I was thinking as well, how am I going to introduce myself, and how am I going to make the connections between the work that I've tried to do and rehumanizing the ends. And so I suppose my sociological goggles are going to come from a slightly different perspective. So I'm an academic, but I'm a late life academic. So I came to this academic space very late in life, which means that I had a very long working life before. So I've worked in a lot of places, and I've had various kinds of jobs, but they've always been with the public, always public facing. And in all of that time, so when you were talking about being at school, what was expected of you, what you thought you could do, I left school when I was 16, because that's what you were supposed to do. If you were from an area that I was from, you left school when you were 16 and you got a job. And I'm talking about a time that's a very long time ago, right? So I'm just looking around the room to see if I can see some fellow people from my generation. So just to explain that at 16 in the 1970s, you were an adult. You went to work, you earned a living, you made your contribution. And if you were an adult from a working class family, that's what you did. And so that's what I did. And then for a long time, I thought that further education, higher education, that wasn't for me. You know, it wasn't something that someone like me did. And so I did all of my further and higher education part-time as a mature student, which means that I don't really, and still struggle with the nuances of academia and how it works. And so I'm always stepping over boundaries and not quite understanding where I'm supposed to be. And I think that shows in my work as well. My work's very interdisciplinary. I'm really interested in black popular culture. I'm really interested in musical forms. I'm interested in what music does in terms of what it does for people, how it kind of holds you together, how it lifts you up in good times and bad as well. And so somehow, in all of this, I find myself not quite at the top of my profession, not quite, somewhere near the middle, and I had enough. So I set up a business with a friend of mine in East London, which is where I'm from, mostly for the last 40 years. And I was running this business, and I'd done a undergraduate degree part-time, and I'd done an MA part-time as well. I was running this business in the early 2000s in East London, and we were taking young people on work experience. And the school would send us what they called the pre-NEET. So NEET is not in education, employment, or training. So these were the young people from ends that they expected nothing from. They weren't going to get 5 A-star to C GCSEs. They weren't going to get the pick of the colleges or the A-levels. And they said, well, you know, if you can keep them in for a week, that'll be great. They expected nothing. And I watched these young people come through the door, and they were a little bit like me. They wouldn't sit in the seat, were really interested in the computers for what they wanted to do. So we're talking about an era of MySpace, and Facebook had just arrived. So they'd roll in, nobody had a pen, no one was really, really interested in how, you know, the training business worked, but they were interested in, you know, being able to get onto MySpace and share whatever they were sharing. And so bit by bit, I just became more interested in what these young people were doing. These were the young people that were not quite written off, but not much was expected of them. And that was the start of my PhD. That was the start of my PhD, because I saw young people that from an area that was very multicultural. So in that area, almost 100 languages are spoken, and didn't matter what cultural background these young people were from, they'd come in with the same music on their phone. So I just thought, oh, I hear this on the bus as well. I hear this when I'm walking up the high street, you know. Now I've got a name for it. So that was the start of my PhD. I was interested in entrepreneurship because I had a business. I was interested in young people and the possibility and the possibility for young people once the world was opened up for them. And I was interested in grime at my big age. Look at that. So I applied to do a PhD at more than one place, and 2 places said no. One place lost my application form and took me on a long dance and then said, no, that's not the kind of research that we would support here. So I got told to be on my way. And then I did get a place on a PhD, and I was self-funded, so it took a very long time. It took a long time to do it. But what's interesting as well, when we're thinking about rehumanizing. I was looking at an area that I knew with young people that I was familiar with as people, and it wasn't seen that way in the academy. Somebody actually said to me at the first presentation I did, "Why have you brought this here? You know, this sounds like children making a noise." I had Roll Deep and Chip, and they said, "You know, this is, you know, what is this? What is this? Is this a suitable subject for academic inquiry?" I'll never forget it. It was one of my first questions. "Do you think this is a suitable subject for academic inquiry?" So I said yes, because I was inquiring, you know. So that didn't go down very well. But I think it is, in terms of the rehumanizing the ends. All of my work, and I started off writing fiction actually, but all of my work, including my creative writing and academic work, has been about, not in an egotistical way, just trying to find my place. I wanted to find myself in the history books, and I wasn't there. I'm from a slightly different generation to probably many of the people in this room. My parents came here as part of that, Windrush generation. No. But they came here in the 1950s, and they settled in Brixton, mostly, to start off with. They're part of that generation that came in the 1950s. And so I grew up with a kind of no sense of belonging to this place or anywhere else. So my quest was always to just try and find my place. And so that was what my creative work was about, that's what my academic work was about, always slightly out of balance, I think, with what I was supposed to be doing, but I think that's just me. And all of the work has been about, or trying to, not just write about people as though they're objects of study, not write from a distance, but write from up close. And when you were talking about this category of deficit, when it's our communities and our young people, I wanted to steer well clear of that. And so there's I tell people what my research was on, which was grime music and entrepreneurship, or people say, well, tell us about the drugs. There's got to be drugs. And it was always framed in this way. And so I was always really careful about how I researched and how I wrote, because you have to be honest about the people you write, but you have to honor them as well. I was trying to say that these young people that were being enterprising, there was more to that grime music economy that you could just see at the surface. There was a lot more going on. People were developing all kinds of creative skills that mattered, that were important and significant, and it was a battle then. It's not a battle now, because people see that now. I think people see that now. So it's not a battle now. So that I think that's my contribution. I think that's what my work is, what I've tried to do with my work. The last book, Terraformed, was absolutely about rehumanizing the ends, trying to write in a way so that people could understand the systems and the structures that you were describing so well, both of you, in a way that gave people a language to articulate some of that and to, well, maybe change some of that, who knows. But that's me in a nutshell. You left me with a lot of work to do. So, yeah, I'll stop there for now.
I mean, yeah, I'm really I'm feeling a lot of things just from hearing all of that. First of all, I'm blown away and I'm really gassed that you're here. And yeah, I just think what I think would be really good to do next, actually, just check the time because we're due to have a break on that hour. I'm trying to see Fazana, but I can't see her. I'm trying to see, maybe we should have a break now, like a quick 10 minutes, and then go into some questions, and then we can also open up to the floor for questions. How do we feel about that? Yeah? Okay. Okay, I'm seeing nods. All right, let's let that settle. Let's take 10 minutes and then be back. And can we get some music for the break? Yeah, so back in 10. So that'll be 12 minutes past 8. Thank you.
Deep like I'm burying hearses, preach like I'm doing up churches, sin for a bit I got
Yes. Okay. We're back. Thanks, everyone. Cool. So I'm really excited about that conversation that we just had, or those offerings and points made by all of the speakers. What I was gonna try and bring us back in with, because I think we've heard from all of you around. I think what I've heard from the discussion so far is a lot about new narratives about us and writing ourselves into narratives, and also putting how we respond and how our communities are in context against narratives. And we've also touched on some of the challenges around some of that. So I was thinking two things. You have a choice. Is there anything that you want to expand on, or expand on from what we've already heard? And also, are there any questions that you have for each other, or comments or responses to something that one of the other speakers has shared? And I'll let you have a little think.
I just wanted to say that I said this to someone outside. Christina, my friend, I just say outside. I was saying this, that Joy's work, when I first came across Joy's work, obviously I was still in the process of doing my PhD, and I got to say it made me feel seen. It reminded me of being in my brethren's bedroom listening to On Top FM and texting in and all of these silly things that we used to do. And it was nice to have that reflected back, that you matter enough, that in that, in academia or whatever, that you matter enough to be reflected not just as a problem, but to be reflected in a way that's joyful. And the other thing was that I think Joy made a kind of platform. So now when I'm doing certain kinds of work, I know I can lean back on that, that work that Joy did, and other people, not just Joy, but other people. Joy is a significant person, particularly when we're talking about rap music. Obviously I have some personal connections to rap music, and I've done some writing recently about thinking about some of the problems and the way they're framed. And I just wanted to say that, because the work that you do, there's a reason why, you notice every our work we invite you to do stuff. Because I can't say how much respect and appreciation I have for Joy's stuff. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that, really.
And I want to go back from what you were saying. When it comes down to being seen, it's so, especially when you're any type of creator, and when you're a creator from our kinds of backgrounds, it's very likely that you're gonna say something, or you have a cadence that you haven't heard before in your space, and even in your most relaxed state, you've never seen someone as relaxed as you who's come from where you're from. And it is important for you to let that come out, because you have no idea what the generational implications of that is for good. For there to be a new cadence and a new slang, there's certain, so for example, and I know there's waves of this, but I'm just talking from my musical history, that there was a period of time when UK rappers spoke with an American accent, and that was cool to do. Everyone was fine with that. No one challenged it. And I think there have been waves of that, right? But for me, there was two rappers. There was one guy called Skinny Man, another one called Klashnikov, and them two was just rapping, but rapping in a British accent. It's oh, you could do that, yeah, that's cute. But then not too long after that, then you'll get cussed out if you was in an American accent. It's that's not what you do. But it takes someone to be no, I'm gonna be in my own skin, still have the same level of skill and be able to achieve what I need to achieve. Also as well, when you are coming from working class or black experience and you're trying to bring something new, just going back to what the impact that your work has made, Joy, is that there's so much extra work you have to do that almost it feels like by the time you've done the infrastructure, you set everything up, it's like, I don't even want to use it. So it's like that in and of itself is a lot of work. But it is important for all of us to see ourselves as historical figures. If you don't, then the work is tiring and you won't be able to complete it. But if you see yourself as a historical figure, I know that like what I'm doing now, which is taking me my life to do, is going to be a preset for like younger kids. It's going to do it quick. Authors is not going to be a thing to talk about like for some kids in the future. For me, it was a lot of work, but for them, it'll be a preset. I was like, no, of course you wrote books. The same way how like we actually, going back to music and business, like we take for granted that there is a business model around music whereby like you can, so for example, I struggle with getting, Authors the Estate wasn't the case, but for me, I struggle getting a lot of black men from Ends in workshops. And I think, I've got a theory, the actual environment that I have, like art workshops and the Crayolas and stuff like that, man, I'm like, I'm not doing that, man, that's cool. But that said, if I was to have a studio, I wouldn't even need instructions. There's no brief, there's no nothing. They'll figure out how to like pour their heart out into song. It's just that the context needed to be a little bit different. But I think also as well, there's, especially when you're dealing with people who want to imagine, but they want constraints. Music works because it's like, cool, here's 8 bars, right? Or here's 16 bars. Do that 16 bars twice. There's a chorus in the middle. Put it out on Spotify. Video record yourself in the studio rapping it. It goes out on YouTube. Get a couple hits. Like all of that infrastructure is very clear. Whereby like that's why oftentimes a young black kid from Ends is like, cool, I want to do music. Where they might not even want to be a musician, but it's a very clear format on what to produce and also as well where to go. And it's important for us to have that same thing with publishing, same thing with all the types of like design, all these types of other disciplines. It's important for us to ask ourselves like, what is the 16-bar format for design or architecture? Or architecture's a bit crazy. I don't know, don't do that for architecture. we want safe buildings, but like, what are the different formats for all these different disciplines so we can actually broaden that same thinking that we have with music? Can it be broadened out into other stuff as well? But yeah, it's a lifetime of work and it's not a joke, but it's definitely generationally worth it.
So small ad from me, which is to say thank you again. I take nothing for granted, you know, and so it's a couple of things that we are all historians, and everyone has a story to tell, and I think even more so, and more importantly, from people who are from marginalised communities, we have to write those stories, tell those stories, share those stories in whichever way we can. Even when there are people saying that, oh, not that format, or don't do it like that, we must do it, because otherwise the platforms get lost, the foundation gets lost. And when you were talking about there's a kind of blueprint for black music, well, there is, and the grime MCs laid a blueprint drawing on sound system culture. There's a continuity of practice from the blues dance to the DIY grime events, laying out a blueprint now for the drill artists and so on. But if we don't record it, if we don't write it down, somebody else will either come along and say it didn't happen that way or it didn't happen at all. So all of our histories, all of our stories are important, and then pulled together, they create something that is really quite powerful. And so the author's work that you're doing, the academic work that you're doing, Yusuf as well, is all part of a bigger story and a bigger pattern that we all have a part to play in. So that's what I wanted to say.
I also want to say that there was yesterday I was on the train and I typed up Risky Roads 2, and Risky Roads 2 is basically like it's basically like a DVD compilation of different people just rapping. But this was during the time when like Gets was called Ghetto, and like Devlin and all the man there just rapping. Yeah, one guy called Criminal. At the time, he was my hero in year 8 because he was around about the same age. And like, but at the time, it just felt like someone happened to be in a studio recording these people rapping, and that's exactly what happened. But now it's 15 years old, and there are children who was not born when this video was recorded, and now it has a different level of historical importance. I'm saying that all to say, like take your camera seriously, like take your voice memos seriously, like record things, date it, put it in a folder. You ain't got to make a documentary yet, you ain't got to do exhibition yet, just store it, because like this moment here, thank God it's recorded, this moment here will be historical 5-10 years from now. And we'll be looking at, like, imagine the time when we was talking about rehearsing freedoms and what were they like. And if you're someone's a time travel, be like, what is it like? You'll be like, it's a normal day. Do you know what I mean? But when you look back, we're gonna be able to understand how important this moment is. So when you writing things down, drawing things down, taking pictures, recording voice memos, like, it hasn't got to be a project, but the practice of remembering through the technologies we have, rather than just putting it on stories, is such an important thing, because that stuff gets deleted, and actually there's mad institutional like efforts to make sure you do not remember how this thing went down. So remembering your history is super important.
I think that's a really good segue into what I was hoping we could all touch on, and like, this question that I had kind of thought about for this panel. First of all, I'm not gonna lie, I stole it from another panel that was as part of this festival, but I think it was really a beautiful moment as part of that panel. It was the policing and the one with, safety beyond policing. Thank you, Fazana. And it speaks to what you've been talking about, but like, just to also preface this question, like, because I feel like there's a difficulty with this question, which is that I feel like in communities where there's a lot of harm or a lot of violence or like just kind of like difficult circumstances, it's like it can feel difficult to slow down and take note of, like, you know, how am I feeling, or, you know, is it safe enough to connect with my vulnerability right now or anything like that. So I want to offer out to the panel, what is something in your lives, or can you tell a story, or can you share a piece of art or music in your that you've come across that really affirms the value of our communities and their lives, or love or care in our communities. And it can be anything. Like, one of the answers to the question in the other panel, like, they were talking about, you know, like, it was like Tupac Changes, that song. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that song is just like really...
When I left school for our end of year party.
It's a sick song, right? And it says, and that, to me, that song's so life affirming, because it's like, it's real, like, it's talking about our pain, and it's talking about the struggle of like being taken seriously and like being considered, you know, like, a whole human person essentially. Like, but I won't answer the question because it's your question. But yeah.
It's a very meta response though. So like I don't have a piece of art to share, but I have an artist that has been really helping me. So it's Cleo Soul, and it's not just the music, it's how she puts out the music. So Cleo Soul has been around since early 2000s. And then she was doing like a couple industry songs and all that kind of stuff. And then she kind of went away, and then she came back with Rose in the Dark. And then the next year came out with Mother. And 2 years later, now she got 2 albums back to back. Just drum pads. You could tell that they hired out a whole orchestra to like play this song. It's very beautiful, sounds like a classic, and then all of the albums sound like classics. But the thing that sticks with me is that she has given herself the freedom to still be private. So like, she updates her Insta kinda, like does no interviews, does one concert a year. You're not really seeing her feature. And she's all the things that you feel like you need to do as an artist or a creator or a practitioner. I need to do this. I need to connect with this person. Need to network. I need to make sure I market myself. Like, she's like, no, I'm going to do exactly what I came here to do, which is make music. I'm going to do it as honest as possible. And I went to go see her in May, and like the whole Royal Albert Hall was pack out. So it's a secret that we all know about. And the thing that I find the reason why that means a lot to me is that I am from a black creative from Ends, you're always under this consistent temptation to sell your privacy, and to sell your trauma, because it makes more money than your joy. Let's not get twisted. Like, you'll be able to pay your bills with trauma. And it's dangerous, because oftentimes when you're desperate to just be like, listen, I just need to pay the bills, the thing that's up for sale is the thing that needs to be healed. So it's important for us to figure out, like, what is the thing that we actually want to put out, and then how do we manage ourselves around that. So Cleo Soul and how she's been putting out music has been very uplifting for me, because I do think that it's important for us to be very deliberate on what we share and what we don't share, and what we want to put out, and what is sacred for us, and what is private, and what doesn't need to be put out into the world. That's another part of rehumanizing ends. It's like, you don't need to know everything. Like, part of my human right is for me I can have a private life, and a private life doesn't need to raise any suspicion. It can just be my private life. So yeah, I think like that is a very and how she's been moving for the past 4 years really inspired me.
So the question is something that's joyful from the neighborhood, yeah.
Yeah, something, it can be something you're practicing or something.
So we were talking about this earlier. I think sometimes where, particularly like, I think sociology is like a very critical discipline, and sometimes we get so carried away with the critique that we forget to find the joy. That's what I like so much about Joy's work. We were talking about it before, like, you know, and listening to Andre, what I really enjoy is that they find the joy. Before actually we came out, we were talking a bit about fatherhood, and probably like the times I look forward to the most now, which sounds strange, but there's a reason, there's a rationale for why fatherhood is important, is the time I spend with my little girl, to be honest. And that's the time that, like, I think about those weekends that I have with her, and I'm thinking about those weekends of what I'm buying. I've been buying her Christmas presents. This isn't very good, it's neoliberal parenting, but I've been buying her Christmas presents since August, you understand? But, and because we had so much destruction done to our families historically, you know, I have my family has been affected by the care system, by other things, you know, historically. Racism is a big part of that, which destroyed, you know, my mum and my uncle are mixed heritage people that were born in the 50s. You can imagine what happened to them. So reconnecting with that, even though it's been a very challenging thing, is probably the most joyful thing that I could do. And finding solidarities with other men around fatherhood and around trying to locate ourselves and understand our importance, you know, because I'll be honest, structurally, and I've read the literature on fatherhood, trust me, structurally, a lot of child development specialists think that fathers aren't important. And that's the truth. That's, you know, if you look at legislation, if you look at the law, and there's reasons for that as well, because of the amount of violence that men perpetrate. And that's also not a myth. That's true, that men do violence disproportionately. And, you know, we need to have conversations about that. But rooting myself in that identity as a father, even though it's a difficult identity, is an identity that I think makes me better more consistently than it makes me worse. And it helps me to reconnect with a lot of the things that were sort of, or even are still taken from us. You know, that destruction even of the family, even of the people, the closest people to you, that these structural things that I've talked about before, they destroy. They break them apart. They weaken you by tearing you from what you love. So to practice that love for her, no matter what the circumstances, no matter if it's challenging or not challenging, if it's a good day or a bad day, I think makes me better. So I'll say that that's in a roundabout way. It's a very personal way, but that's the way it links to the wider history of that struggle, and why I think it's important that we do more to support each other, both as mothers and fathers and whatever else is it, in between that. Like, we should support each other to do that, and I think we don't do it enough, but it's starting to happen somewhat, and I'd like to see that kind of happen more. But yeah, that's my response to that.
Very small. I suppose, in answer to the question, or maybe not in answer to the question, I think, I show up. I show up. So I show up in particular for the young people who are in my life in some way or another. They don't have to be related to me. And I show up because I grew up in a time that was difficult in many ways for some of the reasons that you described, the racism, the hostility, and so on, and always being out of place. And when you look forward, however many decades, on the surface it seems as though life got easier because there were more things. There were more things, there's more stuff. There are many kind of ways to make our life easier, but I really do think that for young people now, the world is a chaotic, hostile, and sometimes terrifying place. And while on the surface it might look as though they're just kind of rolling through, being loud and being difficult, a lot of the time behind all of that there's a struggle. And so I show up, and I show up however I can, and encourage other people to do the same. There's been times in my life when I described some of the peaks, and how, and it is great to be a writer, it's great to be an author, it's great to see my name on a book. But there have been times in my life, for all of us, I'm sure, when, it's not been so great, and kindness showed up for me in places and in ways that I didn't imagine. And so I have always been a kind of glass half full person, but I try and make sure that, I share some of that kindness around where it's needed, where I can see it's needed. And the other thing about encouraging people to do the same is it's easy to walk on by. It's straightforward and easy to be a bystander, but even if all we can do is bear witness, show some kindness, because really and truly life's hard, sometimes.
Thank you so much. We get a clap for that? I think it's a clap for that, yeah. Yeah, what you were saying just then reminds me of a quote from a song lyric, I think, or something. I can't even remember it properly, but it was something along the lines of like, we're in pain, but we love hard, or something like that. And it's like something about how, that showing up and that care happening in communities experiencing a lot of marginalization, the strength of that, and the value of that. And I really appreciate you sharing that. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes. I think Fazan is coming with the mic.
Thank you so much to all of you. That was incredible. I just want to say, it really resonated with me because I grew up in the ends, and it's almost like a kind of social ecosystem of people who I think wouldn't have survived in this space. So a lot of people in my block are mentally unwell, or from a refugee background, or very deprived or marginalized, and I really, really resonate with these messages, but I'm wondering how can we bring this outside of the space, because I feel like a series of kind of social deaths, like for example, like the pandemic and stuff, I feel like there's more tensions than ever between the people, like, in these kind of spaces sometimes, and I'm wondering how we can kind of come together and bring these ideas, like, and facilitate kind of discussions and kind of healing outside of people actively seeking, like, Healing Justice London events, for example. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a super difficult one. I think one of the things that's been helpful for me when it comes to working with communities like that is to do the work of thinking about what are possible solutions, and then asking yourself, like, what is the smallest unit that this thing could be for it to still be a solution, and then try to distribute it as much as possible. I think one of the things that can stifle us is to think about solutions in a way where it's going to be this one thing that will fix the situation. But if we think about it in terms of, like, here's 6 possible solutions, what's the smallest thing that we could do within our budget, within our resources, within the networks that we know, how far can that go? And then let's almost have a, I don't know if you know about pointillism, but pointillism is like the paintings that have like loads of little dots. And then when you zoom out, these small dots actually paint a picture or give an impression of something. I don't know, I don't have an answer, but I think that a good way to approach it is to think about, like, what's the smallest version of these big ideas, and then how do we distribute it at such a volume that it has a pointillist kind of effect where we look back, it actually does solve a lot of the things that we're looking for. But yeah, I don't have an answer, but yeah, that approach has been helpful for me in the past.
I think sometimes as well that things are happening, and what Andre was saying about looking for the big solution, that sometimes what's happening are that lots of small things happening in different places. So people providing different kinds of services on a very small scale, people offering a kind word or cooking some food for somebody on a very small scale, and those things make a difference. They make a difference in that moment. And I think sometimes as well that these conversations, these discussions, the sharing of knowledge and understanding, it is happening. Sometimes I think it's for us to take notice and see what we can do to kind of add to what's already happening. So yeah, and I think when everything looks so or appears to be so bleak, it's easy to lose heart and think, oh, everything's terrible and nothing's happening. But often in those little dots, there's a lot going on, I think.
Did you want to answer that, Yusuf?
I think there's another question.
Cool.
They did a good job with that one.
Yeah, let's take another one.
Firstly, I have so much respect for everyone on stage, genuinely, and a lot of love. Sitting here talking about this on a Friday evening, yeah, do you know what I mean? And you just wouldn't have there, do you know what I mean? So yeah, thank you all. My question is going to be a stream of consciousness. A question will come at some point. But I work in social justice spaces. I think about social change. I'm around a lot of people that are either doing good things or think they're doing good things. And there is a difference that when you meet someone from Ends, within that context, there is something that happens for me, I'll speak in the eye, there's something that happens for me that is like, oh, you get it. And that's slightly different to like the other people that are trying to get it or working to get it or want to get it. And I think my question is around how you navigate that Because I think how you navigate that in a way that is both respectful of those in the pursuit of being genuine allies and genuinely trying to work towards change, and navigating all of the complexity around that.
Thank you for the question. One thing that I've experienced a lot is actually you end up trauma bonded to people, especially if you're like the only 2 people or 3 people in like a space where you're sort of feeling a bit isolated. So like within the university or within this space or that space, you know, I'm sure it applies in other spaces too. And that also is a bit of a problem, because if we become bonded to each other just through our trauma, we ain't bonded to each other through our joy. And I think I've seen that happen too many times, is that our bonds just become about our trauma and we forget to enjoy each other's company and enjoy each other as people. And I've definitely been guilty of that, 100%. So I would extend that out, I suppose. So if I'm advocating for bonding through joy with people that, you know, in inverted commas, are like me, and that's, you know, loosely, I could also advocate for bonding through joy and through trust and other processes with people that maybe aren't so like me. And I am not very good at it, to be honest, I'll be real. But I think that there is a space for that. There's a lot of things, so like, you know, I've had girlfriends that have a different social class and ethnic background, or other, you know, key people in my life, and there's always problems with that. There's differentials in power, differentials in possibility. I use the word possibility a lot in my work because I think it helps us to understand where we're at. So like when I use that metaphor for liquid, like tar versus, you know, walking through, you know, the resistance of the air, it's a bit like that. So sometimes if you have a friend or a colleague or someone like that, they don't understand your struggle because they're moving through a different viscosity of different consistency. And it's like, how do we bridge that gap and communicate with each other a little bit honestly, but, you know, with kindness and with also understanding that it would be difficult to understand that from that position. And I think those are the things that I would advocate for. The final thing I'll say is I've had, you know, I work at the Stephen Lawrence Research Centre, and we do a lot of work like trying to teach teachers racial literacy, which is an interesting whole topic I could talk about. But one thing I'll say is most people come with good intention. They might come with a lot of racist practices, or, you know, common sense is what I would describe as docs are like common sense. They're practices that probably racialized people come at such a level that they're common sense to them, and that they don't have the skills yet to reflexively like challenge themselves on certain practices. But I would say they come with good intentions. So if we can find a way to work with those good intentions, but also be honest and transparent with people about the ways in which they're hurting us, I think that that is a way to try and manage those relationships. But I also admit I'm not always very good at it. So that's my response.
Should we take one more question, I think? Yeah, I think we've got time for one more.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the healing in your words and the metaphors and the poetry and the stories that you shared. It was so good for the soul. I think really hard. When I think about rehumanizing the ends, I think of Ladbroke Grove. And like my older brother was there the night of the fire. You know, so I'm thinking like I hear the joy and I feel the joy inside of me, and your reminder, I'm taking that with me. I also feel so much pain when I think of rehumanizing the ends and the people who died and the people who still don't have homes. And so I want to share that pain and bring that into the space and bring Grenfell into the space and the kind of stain that's left. And I also want to ask, how do we get Kensington and Chelsea Borough to humanize the ends, please? But like, how do we get a system to humanize the ends? That would be great. If you could help me with that, I'd be indebted to you.
Thank you for sharing that. So I haven't personally lost anyone in Grenfell, but I have a very, very, very close friend who has lost a few memories of her family, and her name's Firuza Afwerki. She's a photographer, and her response at the time was to photograph the people who are the survivors, or some of the survivors in Grenfell. I made a book, and then it's been going on for a few years now, and it's the solution to it is not photographs, but from seeing her journey, one of the things that I witnessed is that there was a play about Grenfell, and the whole play, it was done quite well, but like the whole play was kind of about the negligence that's happened. But then when we got to the end, there was a video of different people who have survived, and she then spoke, Firuza then spoke, and then she then spoke about how it's important to keep the dignity of the people who have passed. And then I understood the power of what happened, whereby if she and people like her did not tell those stories, the whole story would have been known as a negligence from the government, and that's true. But then what ends up happening is that you do not see the people for who they are. So I can only answer half of the question. I don't know. Because till this day, if you look at like what Grenfell United is doing, they fighting day in, day out, and still nothing has come back. And in times of trauma, times of death, times of war, you don't know how to respond to any of that. But the most important thing is that there has to be, it's important for there to be someone to ensure that like dignity is kept and beauty is kept. When we're talking about rehumanizing ends, it's in a context that is very dark and very violent, and sometimes it can seem like this is not happy-go-lucky. Like there's loads of violence happening in where we are, but it is very important to also make sure that dignity and beauty, as frivolous as beauty may sound, it's important to make sure that it's kept, because if that's not kept, then the way in how we will remember these events and remember ourselves would be lost. So that it's the one of the things that the metaphors that I have is when someone's grieving, some of the hardest things to do is to talk about the future. What are you doing tomorrow, or what you plan on what are you going to do in the next 5 years is the worst question to ask someone when they're grieving. Sometimes this question is just to be present, like we've speaking about being present, and then other ones is sometimes talking about the past, good memories. And in the time when it just happens, it seems like it doesn't make much sense, but long term, I think it's very important for our collective healing. So apologies, I'm not able to respond to the second part, but the first part is super important, making sure that the beauty and the dignity and the memories of the people you love is always kept strong.
So a few years ago, when I was teaching criminology, I taught on a corporate crime module or organised crime module, and I taught Grenfell as a form of organised crime, which it was. It's funny, when some people do organised crime, it's not a crime. When other people do it, it is a crime. I work, where I work at the Lawrence Centre now, one of the things I have to say to people is that it's not over, it's not finished. Like, they didn't get justice. And sometimes we ask ourselves, what could possibly retrieve that situation and make it just? What could be a just outcome for that? And I don't know. Like, some wounds are so deep and so unfair, and I know this isn't the theme of rehumanizing, but sometimes accepting that will never be healed. Never, never. But one thing I will say is I used to take students on marches and, the silent march and stuff, and I don't always know if I did the right thing doing that, or whether I think it was some were accepting it in the right way, and others maybe were viewing it in different ways. But, that's why I was trying to encourage them to get involved in activism, trying to encourage them to have solidarities. But one thing I will say is that in that space, people are rehumanizing one another. Like, I know enough about Notting Hill and Carnival and, lots of other, relationships and interpersonal networks of support in that community. And, even what you're saying here, where I think that work is happening within that space and people do recognize each other. And also people, I write about the ways in which people are wounded, and that sometimes means that they can't care for another in the ways that they would hope. But that doesn't mean in their core that that's not what they want to do. So I would say that in terms of justice in the way that we hope from the top down, what could they do that's just? They could put people in prison, and they should. Let's not mince words, they should. And there's people that definitely have broken the law and caused that, knowing what the risks were. Whether they will, I don't know. But the rehumanizing is happening there, and people are, supporting one another there. And I've seen so much richness in that community, visiting from the outside, and the people I've met there, and, some of what Joy was talking about, about the little, they feed you. Like, you go on a march and someone would feed you. And like, these are things that are rehumanizing that area. The violence that they do, we can't undo. But, in the context of that violence, we can find ways to stay human. And I think that, I have to say that they are doing that. So, and I'm sorry that it's painful, and I'm sorry I couldn't say something more hopeful in terms of justice. That doesn't mean I don't want justice, or I don't think there should be justice. But I think that rehumanizing process is happening, and people have always been doing that in that space.
I haven't really got much to add, only to say that if you're from where we're from, we're surrounded by violence and violent acts. It's part of the makeup of where we are. I think the thing when it's that when it's the violence that comes from inequality, the violence that comes from having those gaps between rich and poor, and why some lives appear to have less value than others, and then you kind of thread that through with, when people die in a very sudden, unexpected and tragic way. And I suppose from my own experience, it is those things that you were saying, Andre, about the kind of day-to-day acts of care that rehumanize. Because of Yusuf says, there is no justice. There hasn't been any justice. What could undo what has been done? There's nothing that can undo what had been done. And when somebody's life and lives are taken in that way, there's a kind of visceral response to that, which is to, how can I put this? Is to not feel human about certain things and certain situations. And I suppose that in that context, that all we can do is to try and get to the other side of that and find our humanity again and see people as people, and to treat people in the best way we can, because when you've been in the midst of something that's very, very, very violent and someone has lost their life, then this is quite hard to say because I don't think I've said any of this out loud in this way before. It's a real struggle not to lose your humanity. It's a real struggle not to want to do terrible things yourself. And I think that one of the things that we can do is recognize that and work towards not falling into the, I want to do him something. Do you know what I mean? It's a very human response, but it's an inhuman response. And so instead, I think we seek justice wherever we can. We look for humanity wherever we can find it. And that's the nature of being human, isn't it? It's flawed.
I just want to say I'm feeling a lot of that response in my body. I just want to kind of notice, just the feelings that are coming up there. And thank you all so much. And we're coming to time. So we do have to close. So I just want to, I'm looking over here, but I can't actually quite see, but this is our Healing Justice London community agreements. And I might just try to take it off the wall actually and just read it. But there's one of them in here that I just wanted to point to, and it's that capacity to grow. So these are ongoing conversations. Not everything will feel resolved or resonate at once. We commit to growing and creating spaces to do so with curiosity and creativity. And just to encourage us in that, to just remember these conversations aren't going to feel resolved. But we do have to close. Thank you so much to our speakers. Do you want to, I feel like, is there anything else you want to say before we close?
I want to say to give these books away. That's what I want to say.
Cool, we'll do that. We'll absolutely do that. I just want to reiterate my thanks so much to Yusuf, Joy, and Andre. Just really, you want to say something?
It's a freestyle, so I don't know if it's going to bend. But, I was going to say, I was going to say that oftentimes when we think about power, there are leaders who are in charge of society and our jobs and all that kind of stuff, who it's important for them to take responsibilities for what they do. And it's also important for us to understand our capacity, what we can do, how our actual power, what we can do on a day-to-day. I always get scared in these kinds of talks, because sometimes when we speak about power, we speak about it as if someone else should do it for us. And that's partial. That's true. But also as well, I'm from the thing where it's we have to do a lot of the work up front. So one of the things that I would say is that something to think about is when you're going home on your train or whatever, ask yourself who are the people that I want to be in conversation with, rather than thinking about changing the world or communities or all these big words. It's who's the people, and if you can specify what's the type of people and what's their names if you know their name, and then ask yourself what is the type of conversation you want to have with them, or what's the exchange you want to have with them. And that could just be one question, a line or two, and then just write down what would you want to exchange. And that could be a conversation, that could be food, that could be money, that could be wherever that resource is, what do you want to exchange with them? And how often do you want to do it? Once, twice, every week, whatever. I think just thinking about those people in very concrete ways and be this is what I want to do, and these are the people that I want to join in this journey, allows you to exercise your power in a more practical way. So yes, there's definitely people who need to fix up their lives beyond us, but also as well, the more challenging thing is to ask ourselves, like, all right, what is our power on a day-to-day, and how do we access it and use it? So yeah, take the time to like meditate on that when you're on your journeys.
I want to share something that actually I learned from Joy. Maybe you should say it really. When she came to give her annual lecture at the SLRC, she just talked about not having to rise to everything. Because she's an expert, she's a sociologist, doesn't mean that she has to answer every question. Doesn't mean I have to be able to answer every question. Doesn't mean you have to be able to get involved in every fight or every battle or every spat on social media or whatever it is. And I think that was a really powerful thing, Joy. Maybe you could follow up and say it better, but you know, I think we have that kind of sense that sometimes we feel aimless and we don't feel in control, and it makes us feel like we must do something. But also sometimes it's okay to just sit with yourself and enjoy yourself and do other things, you know, like, and that's not a crime. Like, that's part of why we're here. Do you know what I mean? Like me, when we're spending time with my daughter or whatever it is, those things that I think about that I know that make it worthwhile for me. Otherwise, I'm just always fighting, you know, swimming against the tide, and that is very, very, very exhausting. So I think that's also part of it. Maybe Joy will follow up, because it's something that you inspired me to say. So
I'm glad you're inspired. But it is, you said it. You said what I hoped that I said, and it is that. It's about knowing where to place your energy. It's also what Andre's saying about taking some of that power for ourselves, deciding what it is that we want to do, where we want to place our energy, our time, and our strength and our efforts. And we don't have to have every battle. We're worn out in a very short while. I could have an argument every day. I could be resisting racism every day. I could go into battle with every shopkeeper and every, you know, that followed me. Do you know what it is? But we have to choose where to place our energies and our efforts, and rest. Rest is really important. You know, you can't. Well, my mum always used to say that an empty bag can't stand up. That's what it is. You have to, you know, keep something and rest. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Can we get a clap for our panel, please?